In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to work lateral braids at both the right side and the wrong side of your work. So this design features slip stitch details that continue along a horizontal place, and there we use lateral braids to help connect the slip stitch details all the way along the armholes and down the side seams here. So the lateral braid is just worked over a small area at the underarm, as well as on the other side of the garment. Along this back neckline edge, a lateral braid is also worked along this straight edge here to keep that slip stitch detail continuous throughout the project. I have my demonstration swatch here, and I just wanted to share a little bit about which side of the work will use which lateral braid. Knitting, we work from the right side of the work to the left side of the work. A lateral braid will normally point towards the left, with each of the loops moving one stitch towards the left. So when we're looking at this piece here, this side here is going to have the lateral braid worked on the right side of the work because that slip stitch here is going to connect to the lateral braid moving across the horizontal space here. So these stitches here are going to get moved towards the left on the right side of the work. However, this is where things get tricky. We have this slip stitch detail, which we want to travel towards the right side of the work. And because knitting is, again, worked from that right-hand side towards the left, we will have to flip our work to the wrong side to be able to get that direction and work the lateral braid on this side to move it towards the left-hand side of the work here. That's going to have to happen on the wrong side. So we're going to demonstrate both that right side lateral braid and the wrong side lateral braid. Due to the nature of when things need to happen here, I will be demonstrating the wrong side lateral braid first. And if you go into the timestamps below, you'll be able to skip directly to the right side lateral braid as well. So I am just going to turn my work to the wrong side and get all the way to the point where I need to begin the lateral braid on the wrong side to demonstrate that piece. I've reached the point in my work where I want to begin the lateral braid, and when you look at the right side of the work, that is on this slip stitch detail here. So I want the stitch to continue horizontally along this edge, so that's why we're working a lateral braid here. The yarn positioning is very important when working a lateral braid on the wrong side. You want to make sure the yarn is held towards you, so toward the wrong side of the work. And like a traditional lateral braid, what we're going to be doing is working the second stitch on the needle and then working the first stitch on the needle to essentially reorder the stitches. So what we're going to be doing here is, with that yarn still held towards us, towards the wrong side of the work, we're going to purl the second stitch on the needle. So it may be a little tricky to work this stitch and avoid this first stitch on the needle. Just take your time and be patient, and it will totally work out. It may just take a little bit of extra maneuvering. So here we are going to be purling this stitch. So we'll just purl it like we normally would, and again, taking care to avoid that first stitch on the needle. And then we're going to work the first stitch on the needle, again doing a purl stitch. Once we have both of those stitches purled, we can slide those stitches off of the needle. And when you check the right side of the work, you can see that detail is still on top. So that'll be the critical thing to check as you're working, to make sure that knitted detail maintains on the top and you're not twisting the other direction by accident. So then we'll need to slip this stitch back onto the left-hand needle so we can continue the lateral braid. And before slipping the stitch, you'll want to make sure that yarn is held towards you. Otherwise, it's going to get caught towards the front of the work and you won't be able to work that lateral braid. So pull that yarn towards you and then slip your stitch over onto the left-hand needle. Don't change the orientation of the legs of the stitches here. Just slip it directly over. And then we'll just repeat the process. We're going to purl through the second stitch on the needle and then purl through the first stitch on the needle. And sliding both of those stitches off. And again, checking to make sure that you have that detail leaning in the direction that you want. So moving towards this direction. And again, before you slip this stitch back onto the left-hand needle, bring that yarn towards you so you have it available at the back of your work here. So now here's how that looks on the right side of the work with that lateral braid moving over towards that right hand side because we worked the lateral braid on the wrong side row. Now we're going to focus on the lateral braid on the left-hand side of the work, and this is the traditional right side lateral braid. So this one will be quite a bit more straightforward to work here. So I'm just going to work in my pattern until I am ready to work this lateral braid. I'm now ready to work my lateral braid that's happening on the right side of the work. And again, we're reordering the stitches to move over towards the left. So we're going to kind of keep this column in pattern as we move it over towards the left-hand side of the work. So we're going to be working the second stitch on the needle and then the first stitch on the needle and slipping both off the needles, then moving one back onto the left-hand needle. So due to the orientation of how stitches are placed on the needle with your right hand leg on top of the needle and your left hand leg behind the needle, it's significantly easier to work through the back loop of this back stitch here. It is pretty challenging to kind of poke your way up to be able to access that front loop. So a lateral braid traditionally uses that back loop of that second stitch to just provide ease of access as you're working the braid. So we will be knitting through the back loop of that second stitch on the needle. Then we will be knitting regularly the first stitch on the needle, sliding both stitches off of the needle, and slipping that first stitch on the needle back over onto the left-hand needle. As you can see, we're keeping the yarn held towards the back of the work away from you in this situation. So it's a little bit more natural to work the right side lateral braid because the yarn is held away from you, and that's a much more natural positioning. So again, what we're going to do here is reach around the back and knit that second stitch through the back loop, and then knit the first stitch just regularly, and then slide both stitches off of the needles, and then slip that first stitch on the right hand needle back over to the left hand needle to continue working that lateral braid. And you can see that horizontal detail making its way across the work here. So we'll do that one more time here, placing that needle through the back loop of the second stitch and knitting it, then knitting the first stitch on the needle. Slip that back over to the left hand needle, place your needle through the second stitch and knit through the back loop, knit the first stitch, slide both stitches off. Here's how everything looks with lateral braids at both sides of the work here, where we worked this lateral braid on the wrong side to be able to move it towards the right hand side of our work, and this lateral braid was worked on the right side of the work since we're moving it towards the left hand side of the work, as you traditionally do, working from right to left as you work across a row.